So good afternoon everyone. I hope you all had a good lunch and ready to doze off now. And my job is to prevent you from doing that. Okay, so before I start, I just want to share a few words to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And I have been a very active member in DotNet. I think you are also a member there. And from this particular group, I have been getting mails. In fact, if I open my Gmail, you can see Anand's mails from last, I don't know, pro awareness, right, at that time.
Yeah, true.
So I have a huge list of those meetups, but I could never come and speak due to other pressing commitments. But yeah, finally I made it. Thank you very much for enabling that. Okay, so a little bit about myself. As Palvi mentioned that I am working on various technologies. Just wanted to clarify because people might be wondering, is a program manager and what is he going to talk about development? Okay, so let me justify my presence here first. So this is my 29th year in the industry, and 50% of that I spent in another industry. I was in manufacturing industry, first part of my career, when software was not that popular in India. But I was continuously watching the developments happening. Many of my friends had switched over to starting with mainframe and all the other Unix and other technologies at that time. And I somehow got addicted to VB programming. I was a hobby developer, kind of. And after 15 years, finally took a call. I had a very stable career. I was on site. I decided to quit. And after 15 years, you can understand what is the risk involved. But I made a career switch, and I appreciate the gentleman who is also having a break. It's a little difficult, but it is possible, it is doable. And I picked up .NET because that was easiest to learn, because I came from a VB background. I started with .NET 1.1 and just fell in love. And there was no going back to my old profession. I moved along with .NET, sailed from 1.1 to 2.0, and then finally when 3.5 came, I mean, I don't know how many of you are coding from those days, 2005. I hope you all know when Visual Studio 2008 was introduced with a huge ammunition, WPF, Silverlight, WCF, workflow. It was like mind-blowing. And until then we were just developing Windows Forms application, which are more or less like drag and drop, configuring. It was more like child's play, like today's Power Apps. But with .NET 3.5, entire game changed. You were able to build distributed apps, connected apps, and I just sailed along. I worked for different organizations. I worked as a freelance developer for a while. I was also a corporate trainer. I worked for various companies. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, you can see that. And even today, every day I intentionally spend some time coding. Though at my workplace, I don't get much opportunities because my role is different. But the company where I work, we fortunately have a good culture where if you are interested, you can also be part of any team. So I contribute, I sit along with the developers. Some of them are like, less than half my age. Some are even younger than my daughter, but I learn a lot from them, in fact, when we participate in hackathons, especially hackathons. A lot of ideas come up, a lot of new technologies I pick up. And that is when I was prompted to actually explore the awesome world of mobile application development. About 10 years back, I entered into mobile apps development. I started initially with Windows Phone. How many of you? Anyone who's worked on Windows Phone? Lovely platform. Unfortunately, they killed it. And now Satya is delivering it. But yeah, so Windows Phone was my first platform. But you can't just develop for one platform, right? If you're developing something, you have to develop for all the platforms. So then I entered into Android, iOS, ventured into all the other territories. And believe me, it was very, very difficult to constantly keep yourself updated on multiple platforms. And because I was already into so many things, I couldn't say no to any of my friends or colleagues or customers who were depending on me for those technologies. That is when I stumbled upon Xamarin. When Microsoft acquired Xamarin, until then Xamarin was a paid product, so I'd never explored. But when Microsoft acquired Xamarin, I just fell in love with cross-platform application development because you could use your existing skills, that is from .NET background, you could develop applications for all the platforms. And now we have the upgraded version of Xamarin, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Multi-application user interface. It's called .NET MAUI. How many of you have worked in MAUI? Anyone? Okay, you have experience. Okay. So fine. So this is a little advanced topic. So I have already got a slide deck which talks about introduction as well, so that I'll ensure that you are able to follow what I'm saying. But believe me, after the session, because .NET MAUI is so easy for a .NET developer, it's like almost like coding for any other platforms. Like if you already have background in WPF or Silverlight or Windows Phone, this is like in 1 hour you can start building apps for .NET MAUI. It's so simple as that. They have made it so seamless for people coming from that background. But even if you are not, if you have basic knowledge of XML itself, you can do wonders. You don't even have to be a great C# programmer. Of course, if you want to build an advanced application, you should also have some awareness of C#. But today I think C# is one of the finest languages, and Visual Studio, I would say, is like the best tool that you can have, right? You'll not believe, even I write my emails in Visual Studio, by the way. Because of all the features that you have, right, in Visual Studio Code. So it's far better than Outlook. And yeah, most of I mean, if you ask me how do I do that? As you can see, emails are all mostly repetitive, right? Every project will have the same templates again and again. People don't know the secret. As programmers, we know the magic formula, reusable code, right? So I have all those snippets. It's like pulling it here and just modifying it with all the shortcuts that we have, which makes you far more productive. Yeah, I hope that Copilot will change things now. Office 365 Copilot. How many of you have tried that? You have. So what's your experience like? Does it really make you productive or?
So I use it on Power Automate and things like that.
Okay.
It helps me in not thinking about the complicated expressions. So it's simple to do things, but I would still prefer my logical skills to go in there. So it's helpful though.
Okay. So that's my experience as well. It's good to have an assistant, but you can't completely trust. You have to be constantly monitoring and validating also whether whatever the assistant says or does is correct, right? ChatGPT, I hope you all know most of you have tried it out. Sometimes it gives you some weird things, especially if it comes to new technologies. MAUI don't even search in ChatGPT. My experience, very bad. So ChatGPT, if you're especially using the free version, the model is trained till 2021, and I don't know whether they have upgraded after that. So we will get all erroneous results. But anyways, that was on a side note. So coming back to our topic, .NET MAUI. So I'll just give you it's not a detailed session that I'm going to conduct on .NET MAUI. I have a recording of a session that I've delivered for a different platform or a different forum. I can share that link. Maybe you can go through that. So I'll skip all this, directly into this slide which talks about what is .NET MAUI all about. First of all, it's a free and open source developer platform, and so this is it's free and open source, and you can build native apps for iOS, Android, macOS, Windows. So if you're talking about apps, generally there are three types. You can have native apps, which means they are built using the native API of that particular platform. Like an Android developer would use Kotlin and the Android SDK and the Android Studio, etc. iOS developer would use Swift, or maybe old timers might use Objective-C. They build it on Xcode. They use the API provided by Apple. So that is a native app. You can also build apps using HTML, CSS and JavaScript, which is basically a web app, which is packaged like a mobile app. It is designed to look and feel like a mobile app, but actually it is not. Now, if you are developing something very simple as like a blog, or maybe something which just has some content, that would be good enough. But if you are going to have a lot of interactivity, especially scrolling lists, animations, etc., your web-based apps will fail unless your phone is like really good, unless your phone has got advanced capabilities. You will not get that experience. And the third type of app is a hybrid app. There are like platforms like PhoneGap, also known as Cordova. We have Titanium and many others. There's a huge list that we can talk about. So it's actually a jungle out there for anyone who is starting to get into mobile app development. If you just go and say, how do I start developing an app? It will be like mind-boggling, because today you can't develop for one platform, as I said. Whether you are an indie developer, I'm talking about an independent developer who wants to put an app on the store, or you want to develop for someone. That someone will also ask you, like my customers are all using different phones. So whatever you develop should work everywhere, right? So that's a normal thing that any customer is going to say. And if you tell them that no, I will develop only for Android, you find somebody else to develop for iOS, they're not going to buy it. So you will have to provide solutions for all the different platforms. So I mean, if you want to develop an app with a good experience, you have to use native, so that you leverage all the features of that particular platform. And that is what .NET MAUI allows you to do, but without having to learn all the different languages and tool sets like Kotlin, Swift, Objective-C. You don't have to worry about it. If you are a .NET developer, you are already a .NET MAUI developer. All you have to know is using some new API, which can be done very easily, as I will just demonstrate. And you can build apps for all these platforms, iOS, Android, and not only that, also for Mac as well as for Windows. Though these days, application development for desktops and Macs, like comparatively lesser compared to mobile, but still they're very important, especially in business B2B scenarios. There are a lot of apps that continue to be built and maintained. You can have your complete app developed in C#, but .NET MAUI also provides you an option to build your user interfaces using a variant of XML. XML is a very simple language, most of you would be knowing, right? Whoever has worked with HTML, it's almost similar to that. You have some markup tags and you have to follow some rules. So the tags have to be nested, you can provide attributes, there will be having closing tags. So these are very simple rules. Any editor will guide you, even if you make a mistake. So you can easily build user interfaces using XAML. It is open source, and as I said, it's an evolution of Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms was very good. The only one challenge with Xamarin Forms was that when you create a project, it's really like overwhelming, because you will have a solution with 4 different projects. You will have one for iOS, one for Android, one for Windows, and then you will have to like go into each and every project and keep changing. So now .NET MAUI made it even more simpler. It's a single project, and when you build, which I just demonstrate here, all you have to do is just select from a drop down for which platform you want to build. That's it. Just like how you build for any other .NET application, right? In Visual Studio, just press F5. The same way, you just press F5, you get an Android app. You select iOS, press F5, you get an iOS app. So simple. I mean, it's a no-brainer now. So without knowing the platform specific details, all the tools, etc., you can easily build an app. Advantage of developing this using C# or using this common approach is that you don't have to worry about maintaining different code bases in different languages, different skill sets, different tools, etc. You don't have to worry. And this is just a repeat of what I just already mentioned. So, by the way, .NET MAUI is not the only solution for cross-platform application development. You all might have already heard of most of these technologies. So Flutter was introduced by Google, but believe me, I have tried out all these things. And for a .NET developer, I'll tell you what are the challenges or my experience. Okay, again, this is my purely personal perspective. Yours might be different. So Flutter, it's a good platform, no doubt. But unfortunately, you have to learn a new language. And these days, time is the biggest currency for us, right? We are ready to learn everything, but we don't have time. So you have to learn Dart, you have to learn a new set of API. That was the stumbling block. Coming to React Native, you need to already have React skills. If you are a React developer, which I am, I also develop web applications using React. So for me, React Native was quite easy, and they provide an online interface called what is it called? Expo. So they provide a online tool called Expo where you can actually write code, build an app and see and all that. But again, how many of us would be keen to learn web development and then get into mobile app development? That is a new framework, especially if you are new to React. It involves a lot of learning again. Telerik, you all know Telerik is a very famous company which makes a lot of developer tools and controls, etc. They introduced something called Native Script, which is primarily targeted at Angular developers who want to build applications for all platforms. That is also good, but again, you need to have a background in Angular. So these are all the challenges that I faced. But for .NET MAUI, entry barrier is none. If you are a .NET developer, as I said, you are already a MAUI developer because you are not learning anything new. You are just going to learn a new set of APIs and a new approach to programming, because you are going to develop for multiple interfaces or multiple platforms. You need to have a different mindset, especially keeping the screen form factor and all in mind. You will have to redesign your UI, that's it. So how .NET MAUI works under the core, as you can see the app code, that's your application code, that talks to the .NET MAUI layer. The .NET MAUI provides you a readily usable API. So if you create a button, for example, you don't have to worry. that button will automatically be rendered as a native button on Android and a native button on iOS. That's the beauty. So .NET MAUI takes care of the heavy lifting after that. So for you, you just have to say I need a button, and it will look just like a native button on the respective platform. You can also access platform-specific APIs. As you can see, there is a platform-specific API provided below that. .NET for Android, .NET for iOS, Mac, WinUI. So if you have some advanced requirements, maybe you may want to also use that API. But first, at least in enterprise scenarios, I have not come across situations where I needed to get to that level. Okay, for my hobby development, I did try a few things when I was planning to develop some fancy stuff. But otherwise, .NET MAUI API is more than enough. And then this is built on top of your .NET, familiar .NET base class libraries. So the programming experience is the same as in any other platform or any other application that you develop in Visual Studio. And which platforms are supported? This list might be slightly outdated because I developed this slide sometime back, I don't remember when. But at least you can see that it supports all the latest versions. Like you can develop it. When I'm talking about which platforms supported, these are all the apps that you can develop for these platforms. So you can develop directly for Windows 10, 11 and Mac, all the latest versions, etc. And what you will need, system requirements. By the way, you can develop it on either platforms. Personally, I have only worked with Windows. I don't have much experience working on the Mac for development. And for Windows, you need a PC with Windows 10 or 11. You need to install the latest version of Visual Studio 2022. Install the .NET MAUI, which is an optional work. You all know the Visual Studio experience, right? You have workloads, so you have to install that. And then you have to enable the virtualization support because you will be running an emulator. So there is a mobile phone emulator which is available. So you need to have your virtualization support enabled. So modern laptops, all the new laptops normally support that. And if you are developing for Mac or if you are developing for iOS, you need to have a Mac in your network at least. You don't have to own it, but let's say you are working with a team. Then your team may have to share a Mac which is in the network. The reason is because it is not Microsoft is insisting on it. It is because Apple policy dictates that iOS development and Mac development must be done only on a Mac. Because of that restriction or limitation, network Mac is required. But there are there's a Mac in the cloud also. I think some of my friends have tried with the different experiences. Some have said it's fast, some have said it's slow and all that. But just for the information. And if you're developing it for business purpose, you need to have devices because whatever you test in the emulator will not be good enough. Always testing on the emulator is important. So if you're serious about mobile app development, you will have to make some investments on the devices, target devices which your audience is using. So some phones, some tablets, whatever devices they are using. And then for publishing the apps, that's outside our environment, right? So you need to have your developer accounts in the respective platforms. I think for iOS it is $99 US per year on a recurring basis you have to pay. Android, I think it was 49. I don't know how many of you are having an Android account here. It was a lifetime account, but I purchased it long back. It was $49 or something. But that's for once at a time. Once for your lifetime. And Windows Phone, I think it is. For Windows, it's still cheaper, $19 or $29 something. So you need to have these accounts if you want to publish it for others. You can always do side loading. As I say, side loading is directly you connect your mobile to your USB and you can load. But how many devices can you physically do that? There's a limitation, right? So if you want to share it with others, of course, Android APK you can always share it. You can post it somewhere and ask people to download and install. But then they'll have to change the settings in their phone, which will make them insecure. Somebody else can also install their apps. So that is not recommended. So best is to have a store account, whether it's an app store or a Play Store. You need to have an account if you want to distribute your apps. What are the skills you need? As I already mentioned, C#, that's the only skill you need. By the way, you cannot write in VB, you need to write in C#. Any VB programmers here? You still use it? Amazing. I love VB as I said, but I also learned C#. But yeah, C# is quite powerful now and very easy to use as well. So UI design is used, for UI design you will use XAML, which is Extensible Application Markup Language. XML is Extensible Markup Language. This is Extensible Application Markup Language. There's only difference. And it is pronounced as XAML, like camel. I don't know how these weird pronunciations came. In fact, the person who invented XAML, Rob Relay is his name. In fact, I even reached out to him to understand the background and the thought process behind doing it. So he was very kind enough. He has now quit Microsoft after a long career, and he is quite open to. I mean, these days you can connect with everyone in LinkedIn, right? So when I wrote to him saying that I know you are the inventor of XAML, I just wanted to understand what was the thought process, and he responded, and he told that he was not the sole inventor, he was with the team. But then, believe me, those who are already working with XAML know that it makes it so productive, especially with all these features like data binding, markup extensions, and all that. Development has become far more productive. If you are trying to do the same thing in C#, it might take a long time. Coming to the backend, of course, mobile apps don't, unless you are developing a simple calculator or a to-do list, any other app will have a backend. And if you are developing a backend, you will have to normally have all these skills as a traditional developer does. Database design, development, web API design, development. You need to know how to host in a server or cloud, etc. So these are the minimal skills required. Of course, many other things we can put on the list. Architects here would say, what about design patterns, what about secure code, so many things are there, but these are the minimal requirements. And so I will stop here and we will switch to a demo now, where I will show you the, so I think that should be good enough. So if you are to develop a .NET MAUI app, let me create one. So this is your familiar Visual Studio interface. When you create a new project, you will have all these project templates. You can directly go here and search for .NET MAUI, and you will get the possible options. So if you select the .NET MAUI app, there are other options as well, which I will not talk about now. We'll just start with a simple example so that you understand how easy it is to actually write an application. So here, let's say this project name, I'm just going to call this as .NET Meet Demo. And when I start, okay, I have not upgraded my framework yet, so it's still showing 7. 8 is already out. And this laptop doesn't have, I don't use this for coding. And like most of you, I think you all must be using desktops, right? I also believe in using a desktop. Laptop is only for such events. So as you can see, this is a project structure, very, very simple structure. So you have a MAUI program.cs file, and then you have some XAML files. As I told you, .NET MAUI uses XAML similar to WPF, Silverlight, Windows Phone, and all these technologies have been relying on XAML as well. Now, the main page, this is your UI. So the main page.xaml is what you can see over here, and you can see the code is very simple. It's easily understandable. There is a content page which is your root, and so your page is basically a content page. Instead of saying C# content page equal to new content page, you are having a XML version of it. That's simple as that. And inside that you have got a scroll view. So instead of saying content page dot content is equal to and all that in C#, here you just have to nest them. As you keep nesting them, the UI will be created. It's very easy to see visually also. So you have a scroll view, as the name says, it's just a control which allows you to scroll up and down. And inside that you have vertical stack layout, which means whatever you put here will be stacked vertically by default. And then you have some attributes that you have to specify here. And these attributes, the way XAML interprets is very amazing, because it's just not like a string to integer converter or something like that. If you want padding 30 on all sides, you can just write 30. But if you write 30, 0, which means 30 on the left and right, 0 on the top and bottom. And if you want different dimensions on 4 sides, you can put like 10, 20, 30, 40. So XAML, the parser is so powerful, it understands the sequence that you have put. And remember, each of these is converted in code in the background. So when your app is built, which I will not talk about because it's a little advanced part, there is a generated C# file. If you explore the generated C# file, you will understand that each of these numbers corresponds to an object. It's a thickness object. Those who have done graphic programming might understand. So it's creating 4 thickness objects and assigning it to that particular object. So that one line there, one word that you're writing there as padding is equal to so much, it's getting converted into multiple lines in C# in the generated file. So your work is like very easy now. It's more like you're just declaring to the compiler that I want the C# code, rather than writing it. How cool. So, and then you have these options like vertical options, you can say center, top, bottom, etc. And then below that you have all these controls by default. There's an image, label, button, and so on. So let's see what happens when I run this application. Now, how does this page get loaded? So if you go to app.xaml, there is this code behind file for every XAML file. Just like every user interface file that you used to have in Windows Forms or ASP.NET had a code behind file, this also has a similar model. There is a code behind file which are partial class, and in that you will see that there is a new instance of an app shell being created, and then the main page gets loaded here. So there is nothing much that we have to change here. So it's already wired to run this main page.xaml. So let me run this application. So what I'll do is, just to show how it works on an Android emulator, I'll select the Android emulator, and as you can see here, the drop down, when I selected, you could see all the other devices, right? This is what I was mentioning. You just need to select the target platform and then build, and when you're ready to deploy, you just have to change from debug to release and then build it again. You'll get the release version. So now if I choose the Android emulator, I've already installed the Android emulator, and I think it's running as well. So let's see if you can see the output. The first time when you run it will take some time because it needs to build and create all the operations behind the scenes. As I told you, just a lot of heavy lifting for us, though it's not apparent, but if you really get into the details, it's mind-blowing the way they have made it user-friendly. And that's the best thing about, we all know about Microsoft, right? They make the developer tools so amazing that once we get used to it, we don't want to work on any other platforms. Doesn't just make it, I mean, it's not about making us lazy, but it makes us more productive that we feel that we are wasting our time in other platforms, right? Once you start using Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio IDE for that matter, all the other IDEs are coming in front of them. So let's just wait for a couple of minutes. I think we should shortly see the output. So whatever you have here, there is an image, there is a default, there's a placeholder image that they have provided here. Plus there is a label with hello world, and there is a label which gives a greeting message, and then there is a button. Now you will see some additional attributes here. Don't get confused. This is only to encourage accessibility in design. So whatever you are seeing as semantic properties, heading level 1, semantic properties and all, these are optional. But Microsoft is trying to encourage you to use them, because you need to keep in mind people who have accessibility issues. Accessibility can be permanent, can be temporary, it can be situational. When you say situational, what? You are using a phone in the dark, or maybe your screen is not working. Whatever be the reason, I mean, you are temporarily blindfolded, whatever be the reason. So if you want to use it like how a blind person would actually use it, you need to have all these attributes enabled so that it gives you the voice prompts, etc., and you can use it. So those attributes are only to encourage accessible designs, but otherwise it's very simple. So this emulator is launched now. You can see the Microsoft blue, purple is already appearing. We should be able to see the .NET logo in the splash screen, and then we should see the app now. Yeah. So this is the simplest app. So our first app is already built without writing a single line of code. Now if you want to change it, you know that. I mean, if you want to develop a simple converter or maybe a calculator, some of the apps that I recommend that people can start with are simple calculators, whatever you use, right? Your converters basically, for converting from one unit to another, or maybe your BMI calculator, income tax calculator, savings calculator. All these things are very easy to develop. You can simply drag and drop the controls, and then when you add those controls, when the click event, you just have to write the code, the logic, to process the data from the controls, do the calculation, display the output, right? So that's a standard approach. As you can see, very, very easy to develop. Okay, so much for .NET MAUI. Now I'll get into the topic that was planned for today. And the topic that I was planning to talk about today is something called data binding. This will be of interest to you. Now, generally, if you talk about any app, so I have some disclaimers here. So when I distribute this PPT, you can read that. So just to keep myself safe from any legal issues. So generally, when you're talking about apps are all data driven, as you know, right? We have some data background that we want to show in the UI. Now, Apps generally will display and manipulate data. By the way, this is one of the apps which was built by my colleague and friend. So I will give credits to him as well. He's a great UI designer. And so apps generally are used to display as well as allow the user to manipulate the data. And that data can be either in the memory itself, or it can be in a web service. It can be external to the app. It can be outside the app. You're probably connecting through an API and you're modifying. You're sending your data back to the API, etc. So how are these apps, how is this data actually rendered? Generally we use classes behind the scenes, right? And these classes are what we call as models. Now, this is how a typical app would develop. I'm giving a very simple scenario so that even beginners can follow. So if you have a person class with two properties, name and email, if you want to display that in your app, you would use some code like this. Very easy to understand code. As you can see, labels, there are two labels that you are placing for displaying the data. And then in the code behind file, if you have a name for this label, like label name or label email, you just have to use the properties and say that whatever is the value of this particular property, assign it to this. Pretty simple. This is if you want to just display. Now the question is, what if you are giving an option to modify the value? Now things start getting a little more trickier. What is the problem here? You need to implement what we call event handlers. So if I just want to display the name, it's fine. Label is fine. What we just saw, 2 lines of code, matters done. But if you want to give an option for the user to change now then you will have to write additional code. You will have to write event handlers. You have to provide the text change event or maybe a button click event, whatever it is, and then you have to write the code to accept the changes. Whatever the user has entered, you have to put it in the backend or you have to change the data source. Now, this involves a lot of extra work for the developer, right? You have to write all those event handlers by hand. It doesn't get, okay, though the placeholder may be created easily with all the shortcuts and visual studio, that's a tool feature. But the fact remains that you have to write some extra code to implement those features. And that is what data binding helps us avoid or maybe reduce. Data binding is a mechanism of connecting your data to parts of the UI. And they are connected in a way that any side you change, automatically the other side will reflect the changes. Which means now you don't have to write your event handlers anymore. You just have to say that these text boxes which are in the UI is data bound to the source, whatever is the source. The UI did not even know from where you are getting the data. If you just say that, put a binding relationship with the data source and with the target. As you change the data in the target, automatically the source will get changed without you writing anything extra. That is the beauty of data binding. So this works with this principle. There is a new object or a new class provided in all these frameworks. It started with WPF 2005, I think 2006 or something. They started with this approach. It's called dependency properties. So what you see on the other side, it's a bindable property we call it. But basically these are dependency property, a new kind of property. Unlike your CLR properties, which we are all familiar with. Any C# class will have CLR properties. These are dependency properties. But you have a new class called binding. You just need to create an instance of the binding class and tie the source and the target and leave it. And as you keep changing, on one side, the other side changes. And when I say change on one side, that behavior also you can control. If you want it only one direction, you can make it like that. Or you want two-way, you can make it. If you want one time, you can do it. So the behavior also can be modified. So I'll just demonstrate that. So creating a binding requires just 3 pieces of information. You need to identify what is the source, what is the target, and you need to put the binding in. A source can be any accessible object. When I say any accessible object, anything which is public. It can be your .NET program object itself, like a person object or an employee object or whatever it is as part of your program. It can be a piece of a UI. It can be a collection. It can be an XML file. It can be anything. The source can be almost anything, virtually anything. Binding, as I told, it's a new object that you actually create. You specify the source and path, etc., which I will explain. And then you have a target. The target is very important, that you must be able to bind to a bindable property. What do you mean by a bindable property? Now, if you take any of the UI elements, like let's say a text block or a label, for example. A label has text, which is a bindable property. Like that, it has multiple properties, and you will have to ensure that you are binding to only one of those properties. There may be few properties which are not meant to be bindable, so that you cannot bind. That's the only limitation. But for most of the typical scenarios, you will have that option to modify. So whether it is the angle, whether it's rotation, all that you can bind. Now let's look at some simple examples, data binding to objects. So if you want to create a binding like what I just mentioned here, you have a source, you have a target, and you need to create a binding, right? So to create a binding, this is the approach that you will normally take if you are doing it in C#. You will create a binding using new binding, that's a class, and then you're going to call the binding by some name binding for example. And you're going to say name binding dot source is equal to, what is the source? In my case, it is a person object. So I got a person class, right? We just saw in the previous slide, two properties, name and email. So if I got a property or object of that particular class, then I can bind it to that. And the second thing that I have to specify is what is the property to which I want to bind. So that person has two properties, name and email. And I just need to mention that with a property called path for the binding. So binding requires only two parameters to be set, source and path. That's it. Now this is if you are writing in C#. But this is just for a simple example. I have just shown you for name and email. Now if you are taking a registration form, normally you will have like multiple fields, right? So do you have to write code like this for each and every property, which would be very unproductive, correct? But for that, .NET MAUI, you have something called, so in this case, multiple binding uses the same source, that is person, right? Name binding uses person, email binding uses person, like the city, pin code, everything might be using the same person. So instead of having to repeat it, you can replace it with a simple property called binding context, which will be common for all the controls in that particular hierarchy. So if you are going to use a binding context, in this case binding context is what? The page, the content page, which is holding all the controls. So you are going to say that the whole content page has access to the person. So all the controls inside, whether it is your label, whether it is your text block or entry as we call it here, anything that you want to use, you can just use the path alone and say this particular control map to the name, this map to email, this map to the city and so on. You don't have to repeat that person every time, right? So that is how easy it is. Now coming to the target, this is how you would actually create the binding. So on the target, in this case it's a entry control, which is called as sometimes we call it as text block in other or text box in other frameworks. So you are just going to use a set binding method and you are going to bind it. Now this is all done in C#. That is why I was probably thinking, oh, this is like too complex. Now I will show you the easiest way of doing it, and that is where the beauty of XAML shines through. The same thing can be written in one line, which is highlighted. So you see the markup now. In this markup, I have created an object as well. So this is how you create an object in XAML without even writing C# code. I don't have to say person equal to new person, then person dot name, person dot email, all that we normally do in C#, right? The usual stuff. You don't have to do that. You just have to write a declaration, and that object is created for you in the backend. And if you want to bind it, that syntax that you see in front, once you start doing it, it will come naturally. So anything that you want to bind, data bind, you start by using these curly braces. And curly braces is actually a new form of expression called markup extension in XAML. So you just have to write binding and then say source is equal to path is equal to. Now when you say source, in this case the source is this person object that we created on the top. And all these objects when you create, you have to create as a resource, and that's a standard thing. Anything that you create as a resource, you will put it inside a resource dictionary. A resource dictionary is nothing but a collection. And you know that collections, dictionary stores values in key and value, right? So you need to provide a key, and that key is nothing but the person. So all you have to say is bind it to the static resource called person and bind it to the path called name. So you see how simple it is now. All this code that you saw in the earlier slides is replaced by a single line here. Once you do this, your job is done. After that, if you keep modifying the source, things will automatically keep changing in the front end. You don't have to write the event handler code anymore. That's the beauty of data binding. Now, there's a simpler way of writing it because path is actually a default property. You can reduce the code by writing that first. So path is equal to name, you are going to just rewrite saying binding name, then comma, source is equal to static resource. So this doesn't have that path is equal to, right, because that is default. So that means less coding. And all these things come with autocomplete. By the way, as you code in Visual Studio IntelliSense is like continuously learning. It provides you the inbuilt features as well as autocomplete, plus whatever you normally use also it provides, right? So these days when I am writing simple programs, right? Normally I don't even have to type. It's all tap. So it's you actually become lazy sometimes. Now instead of providing the source for each UI control, you can use the same concept here and say binding context, like what we saw in the previous example. So which means that your markup is going to be even more simpler. See, previous slide we wrote binding name, source is equal to person. How much time we have? 10 minutes. Yeah, thanks for prompt. So instead of saying source is equal to person, you can remove that if you just bind it to the binding context. So that makes it even more simpler, right? So that was about how you data bind with an object. Now, as I said, you can bind to almost anything. You can bind to a UI control as well. How do you bind to controls? Again, very simple. This is a very simple example to show how you can bind a slider to a label. So basically what the slider is doing is, the slider has got a maximum value of 360, right? And I want to take this and apply it to the rotation for this label, so the label will rotate as I move the slider. And for that in C#, this is how I will write the code. But in XAML you can see how easy it is now. You just have to say X reference. So if you are binding it to a control, if you are binding it to an object, what do we use? Static resource. If you are binding it to a control, you have to say X : reference. So these are all things related to XAML. We don't have time to explain that in detail, but these are like standard things that you have to just take. So you have to bind it to a control called slider, bind it to a path called value, and as you move the slider, the scale here will change depending on the value. So that was about how you can bind controls. Then binding modes, as I told you, you can bind that. You can decide the binding direction, whether the data has to flow from target to source or backwards, both ways, etc. So you have these options. So generally, source to target always works by default. But target to source will work depending on the type of control you are using. So if you want to really control that, you can define the binding mode saying it is one way, two way, one way to source, or one time. By mentioning that, your job is done. So this is all about how you can implement simple data binding in most scenarios. Now some advanced concepts, and I will just explain how easy it is to you people, because this will be very helpful. How about notifying changes to UI? Now let's say that I have a person object in the programming logic, and I'm just displaying that in the UI. And then some logic changed the particular value. I have not changed it from a UI, right? The value got changed, but will my UI reflect the changes? Normally not. For that I have to implement something called an iNotify property change interface. So that is done very simply like this, iNotify property change. Now this is how you would have to write the code in detail, but I will give you a shortcut. Again, time saving trick. So you would normally write the class like this with all these extra add-ons that you can call it. You have a setter with conditional evaluation, and then you are going to call an event, etc. So all these things can be simply removed by writing it using a NuGet package called 4D. Anybody has used 4D? No. All you have to do is install this package called 4D. Try it out. I will share the code as well. We don't have time to run through all the code, but I got the code and everything in Visual Studio. I will share the link. So all you have to do is install this package called 4D. It's called property change.4D. And then in your class, all you have to do is write two lines. First using statement, and then you have to provide this attribute. And you just have to write your two properties like class, you have to write your properties like name and email. That's it. You don't have to write all the other detailed steps that you saw in the previous slide. This will create those things at runtime. It will inject all those statements at runtime. Okay. Tremendous productivity booster. So this is a must use for all XAML developers, I would say. And coming to incompatible types. Let's say that you have some data, but you want to represent it in a different way. Like I called a weather API, and the weather station is giving me a weather code saying 30. 30, I cannot show to the user saying, go figure out what is 30. 30 might be responding to rainy or cloudy, whatever, a storm, whatever it is. So I need to probably show it in a different way. So that is where incompatible types come into the picture. So in this case, the weather code is 3 and 3 corresponds to cloudy day. So how do I get this kind of a binding? For that, you have to implement something called an I-value interface. Very simple. Just one method you have to implement called convert. So in this case, I am just showing a simple marks to grade converter which all of you will relate to. Like let's say we are displaying some students' marks, and then based on the score, we just want to show whether he is fail, pass or first class. We know the grades, right? Above 60 first class, 40 to 60 is pass, and below that is fail. So I could write a condition like this: if marks are above 60, return this, and so on. And that's all I have to write in this particular method. And this is what I called as a marks to grade converter. And how do I use it? In my program, wherever I am writing the binding, right? After the path, I am writing one more line which says converter is equal to that particular grade, the converter that I just created. Automatically it will display the value in string. So the marks may be 45, 65, 75, whatever it is, but rather than showing a mark, I will be able to show the string corresponding to that. Right? That is the advantage of a value converter. Apart from that, you have also simple text conversion. Suppose you want to show some value in currency or maybe up to 2 decimal values only. 0, F2 means you are just showing up to the second decimal places. And time span, that's again for the time. And if you want to show some quote, you will use the format at the bottom. So these are all some handy string format conversions that you have. And finally, binding to collections. I have 3 minutes left. We have some Q&A probably we'll take it later. So binding to collections. Binding to collections involves a little bit of complexities. One is that let's say you have a collection like this and you want to show it in a list view. List view has a property called item source, just like any other framework, Windows Forms or ASP.NET. You have a list view where you have an item source property and you can tie it to the people collection, and that will display. But how will it display any changes? Let's say that you got something added in the list. Same problem like we had with the case of iNotify property change, right? Something got added into the list and it was not getting displayed. So for that, instead of using a list of person, which is a list of T type, you can use an observable collection, which is a specially designed collection to denote or to notify the UI for any changes. So if anything gets added, deleted, modified, etc., observable collection will automatically trigger the notification to the UI. So use observable collection whenever you are working with collections. That is number one. Second, in the UI, let's say that you want to display the names of few people, but you just don't want to display the name. You want to display the name with a picture and maybe a phone number as well. So that means each and every object you will have to display multiple properties inside one element, right, in the list. Normally a list will show one string. But what if you want to show a complex structure there with a photograph, name, and maybe phone number and so on. So for that you have to create what we call a data template. A data template is nothing but a template which defines how the data has to be represented. And that is again very simple. This is how to define a data template. So as part of this particular property where I want to show name and email both in one shot, I have defined a grid for each of those items. The grid has 2 rows, and inside these 2 rows I am placing 2 labels which will display the name and email together to me. And when I run this application, both these things will appear together in each item in the list. Very simple. So that's about what I wanted to actually talk about. We have like around 1.5 minutes now for Q&A. But I am available here till later today. I will also be attending the other talks. So if you have any questions, we can take at that time. But do you have any pressing question that you want me to take immediately? Or else we can move on to the next.
We can take up questions.
We can take up. Okay.
5 minutes.
Sure, thanks. Any questions?
A couple of things.
Yes.
First of all, thank you. This felt like ASP.NET review controls and things, so I was able to get it. So the question about binding source, right? In real world scenarios, we have complex objects. Like for example, you have registration class, and it will have a person object and address object. We can, I think the answer is yes, but we should be able to bind the complex objects as well. Is it
Yes.
possible?
So I will not cover that part.
Okay.
So when you are going with such complex scenarios, we use a design pattern called MAVM.
Okay.
So it's called model view model. So what you can do is, irrespective of how complex your model is, you can create a view model, which is a model exclusively for your view. So whatever you want to display, that alone you take from that particular complex object, which might have like 100 properties.
Right.
But you're just going to pick up those 5 or 6 which are important, put it in the view model and then display that. So that will give you the buffer where you can make it simpler for the UI to handle. So MVVM is your solution. But since it's an advanced topic, I did not get into that today.
Thank you.
But thanks for the question. And this one is for you. You are right. I have some more candies left. Otherwise, I'm going to take them home. So. Any other questions, anyone? Yes, please.
So on the data binding that you explained, right, we can create the resource directly on the top.
Yes.
So for example, in our application, in actual application, there would be so many resource directly we have to create, right? In that the page, in terms of user reading, it is very lengthy, right?
Very good question. Yes.
DotNet, it is like normally we create the user control. So is
Yeah.
it also possible in this demo also?
Yes, yes. So very good question. So I want to actually answer in 2 ways. One is how to handle these resources. So you don't have to necessarily list them in every page. You can have all these resources listed separately in a common place which will be accessible throughout your application. So that is one. And the second thing, what was the last thing that you asked? I just
Let's say the user controls. Which
user controls. Yes, you can create your own user controls as well using something called a control template. Since that is not relevant to data binding, I did not cover that. But just like how a data template defines how the data is represented, right? A control template, say for example, you want an elliptical button, or you want a sinusoidal list view, a list box. You want to make it form of a sine wave. You can do anything you want, circular one and all that. So for that, you will actually change the way a control looks and works or behaves, right? So we got something called a control template. So that is the answer for you. So that is also possible.
And one more question. The emulators which you explained, right?
Yeah.
For example, in this one you explained the pixel. So all these emulators, .NET 6 is open source. So all these emulators are also free to download in this.
Yes, the entire tools, whatever you saw here, they are all free to download. In addition to that, community also gives you a lot of freebies. There is a MAUI community toolkit. SyncFusion, it provides you a very good control set and it is free for small teams up to 5. I'm a huge fan of SyncFusion controls. And there are many other companies also, Infrasys also has, Telerik also has, but I just wanted to share that there are a lot of controls which are also free, which you can install. So all the emulators are free, the tool is completely free, no license, nothing is required. Visual Studio, of course, we have to follow the licensing terms, but everything else is free.
And deployment packages also gets
It gets built,
free.
everything is getting built.
Thank you.
I'm from non-technical background, just a general question like in C# and this JAML, how you rectify the bugs or like how we know that where exactly the bug and where it is?
Very good question, you deserve actually 2 candies. So, see, you already know in Visual Studio, most of the developers know here, we have a very good debugging system, right? You have watch points, you can set call stack and everything you can monitor. Same way, even in XAML also there are some debugging tools available. Okay, and not only that, there are like a lot of shortcuts that you can apply, like for example, the converter that we just saw, right? Any binding is not working, what I normally do is I write a converter which actually displays in the output whatever is the problem. So the converter can also be used as a debugging framework, by the way. So there are a lot of workarounds that you can actually employ. So your answer to your question is yes, there are like proven techniques in debugging, both C# and XAML.
We can take one last question.
Hi. So I'm thinking like this is look like a public-based application. So
And you are right if you are thinking so. That is the mother of all these frameworks, yes.
yeah. So I'm seeing here will trigger works here.
I have not tried, but good question. I think he also deserves a candy. So in fact, when I was preparing this slide, I was writing that part, but then I thought, okay, I'll not waste my time in exploring, but that is something that I will try it out, and maybe in the next meetup, probably I will share my ideas there.
Because this is state.
Correct. Yeah, so I need to explore that in detail. But in WPF, as you rightly mentioned, you can specify all that, whether it's like text change, that you click outside, all that you can mention, right?
Yes.
So here I am yet to explore all that, because here we have that different platforms, right? So I don't want to give you a premature answer and some assumption. I'll try it out and tell you. Any other
Thanks.